Good evening, everyone. Hi. Very timely group here. Thank you for gathering so that we could get started. I am Kathy Nalivaiko. I am president of the Ukrainian Institute of America, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's European Literature Night, which we are hosting for the second year in a row. Before we get started, I invite you to join me to stand in a moment of silence. It's a practice that we have adopted since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year. And basically, we do this to show our deep respect for and the unwavering solidarity, not only now with the Ukrainian people, but for people all around the world who have to stand for the values of democracy and fight every day for it. It's easy for us while we're standing here. We can come and go as we please, but there are many around the world who have made the ultimate sacrifice with their lives. So in honor of those people, let's just take a moment to recognize them. Thank you. For those of you who may not be familiar with our organization, the Ukrainian Institute of America has been at the forefront of promoting democratic values and Ukrainian culture to the world for 75 years. Through our vibrant programs, the Institute serves as a bridge between Ukraine and the American people, fostering cultural interaction, mutual understanding, and appreciation of shared values and goals. Our partnerships with our European friends through the EU National Institutes of Culture has been a highlight for us over the last couple of years, and this program is just one example of the many collaborative programs in which we engage with them. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to my colleague, Andrew Horditsky, who is going to chat a little bit more about the program this evening, and I hope that you all enjoy yourselves, and thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Kathy, for your warm, welcoming remarks. Under your leadership, you have opened the doors to invaluable new experiences, collaboration, and most importantly, friendship. Welcome to European Literature Night 2023 in New York. I am utterly in awe of the guest writers assembled tonight, of their lifelong journeys in honing their unique their respective craft, their reflections on culture, history, fantasy, crises, both political and personal, language, emotion, reason, perception, imagination, and yes, humor. What they offer us is a gift, one that teaches us to live. This morning, I thought of what I might say tonight, whether I should pull out some semiological twists, a la the Frenchman Barthes or maybe the Italian Eco, or deliver a clever anecdote or two with a wink. But that would be disingenuous, and it's just not me. So I stand here in front of you, dear audience, as a layperson, naked and vulnerable, yet one with an insatiable appetite for the experience of reading, its limitless possibilities for discovery and exploration, an avocation without which I cannot exist. An area that unites Europeans is literature. Most genres of literary discourse are pan-European, and this includes poetry and the theater. But if there is one genre that is quintessentially European, it's the novel. It reflects a common experience, which is the passion to know, a feature typical of European civilization, yesterday and today, encapsulating the right of the individual to a free life. Simply put, Europe can only be the incredible diversity and richness of its peoples, a notion emphasizing a common civilizational heritage, knowledge of its languages, traveling different countries and living in and being familiar with a number of European cultures. I feel that literature is beyond the given or correct definitions posed by academe or highbrow societies, and is more than what we see and perceive. Its boundaries cross our lives, our traditions, culture, social relations, national unity, and a lot more. It serves as a reflection of reality, a product of art, a window to an ideology or ideologies. Everything that happens within a society can be written, recorded in, and learned from a piece of literature. Whether it be poetry or prose, literature provides insight, knowledge, and emotion towards the person who partakes in it in its entirety. Our life is manifested in the form of literature. It is an embodiment of words based on human tragedies, desires, and feelings. It cultivates wonders, inspires entire generations, and feeds information. Even though it is dynamic and multidimensional, literature contributes significant purpose to the world we live in. Never before has life been so chaotic and challenging for all as it is today. As I reflect on the 618th day of the full-out war in Ukraine, my heart is heavy and grief and sadness for the many thousands of lives lost. The horror and futility of war cannot be overstated, as families are torn apart, communities are destroyed, and futures are shattered. The memories of the countless lives lost in battle, the wounded soldiers and civilians, and the displaced families will forever be etched in our European minds. The pain and suffering that these individuals have endured are unfathomable, and our hearts go out to them and their loved ones. What Ukraine, a European nation, shares with its brothers and sisters to the West is an unquenchable thirst for individualism, a never-dying fight for freedom and opportunity for the possibilities yet to be determined. Over 30 noted Ukrainian writers have been killed, and more than 80 authors are defending the country on the front lines. One of these losses sent shockwaves through Ukraine and beyond. By all accounts, Victoria Amelina was a mature writer, still a rising star, her prime a long way into the future. The 37-year-old author and member of PEN Ukraine temporarily gave up her literary craft to pursue truth-telling, documenting war crimes against humanity in Ukraine's hotspots. On June 27th of this year, Ms. Amelina was with a delegation of Colombian journalists and writers in the center city of Kramatorsk when the Russian army struck the eastern Ukrainian city. She died of wounds incompatible with life on July 1st. Victoria Amelina was born in Lviv in western Ukraine. At the age of 14, she emigrated to Canada with her father, but later decided to return to Ukraine. She studied computer science at Lviv Polytechnic National University and worked for various international technology companies before dedicating herself fully to writing. She published 2 novels and a children's book, as well as an assortment of poems and essays, and was a recipient of the Joseph Conrad Literary Award, a prize for young Ukrainian writers. In 2014, Amelina made her literary debut with the novel The Full Syndrome or Homo Compatiens, Lit Accent, a Ukrainian web portal for modern Ukrainian foreign literature, included in it its top 10 books of the year. And in 2015, it was shortlisted for Ukraine's Valery Shevchuk Prize. Her children's book, Somebody or Waterheart, appeared in 2016. Then, in 2017, her second novel, Dom's Dream Kingdom, was published by Old Lion Publishing House in Lviv. It won the prize for Best Prose Book of the Year at the literary festival Knizhkova Tolaka in Zaporizhia, and made the shortlist of several Ukrainian and international awards. Amelina's works have been translated into Polish, Czech, Italian, German, Croatian, Dutch, and English. In the summer of 2022, Amelina joined the human rights organization Truth Hounds, documenting war crimes in areas liberated by the Ukrainian army in the east, south, and north of Ukraine. At the same time, she started working on her first nonfiction book, War and Justice Diary, Looking at Women, Looking at War, which she was writing in English. Soon to be published abroad, it is a chronicle of women who have documented their own lives during the wartime, as well as crimes committed by Russian occupying forces. Amelina's colleagues believe that these glimpses into the depths were a new spark for her creativity. In the words of Ukrainian author Tanya Malyarchuk, one day their work will come to bring war criminals before the court, because that is the only way to break the cycle of violence. On behalf of my friends and colleagues at the Ukrainian Institute of America, I dedicate this evening to the memory of Victoria Amelina and those fallen writers and authors who had so much more to contribute to Ukraine's and Europe's culture. They will never be forgotten. Thank you.
Andrew, it's hard. It's hard, but this is the reason we are here. We are here to support Ukraine. We are here to stand up with you. We are here to show our solidarity. We are here to discuss from the point of view of authors, what we are witnessing around the world. So I know that we will cry, we will smile this evening discussing with the authors, but I think the most important here is that after 2 years of this war, we are still here with you. So, good evening and welcome to European Literature Night 2023. Like last year, we are grateful for and appreciative to the hospitality of our friends from the Ukrainian Institute of America, the president, Katina Levajko, director, Lydia Zeiniger, and Andrew Hodorisky. My name is Miroslav Konvalina. I am vice president of EUNIC New York cluster and director of the Czech Center, New York, Czech Republic, always organized in Europe, European Literature Night. It was based in Prague. The Czech Center New York and EUNIC New York, in cooperation with Ukrainian Institute of America and Pan America, are proud and happy to be able to present another edition of the European Literature Night. The evening will introduce 11 European authors through readings and discussions. You can look forward to multilingual readings, musical performance, panel discussions, and Q&As. And you can be sure that what you will get to know tonight will be a selection of the best contemporary European literature. It is because the European Literature Night is an annual literary showcase which celebrates stories, authors, and cultures from across the continent. It offers a diverse and wide range of contemporary writers across many genres, from fiction to poetry to memoir and histories. Authors, translators, and performers gathered here tonight will be exploring the way history that shaped the current crisis facing Europe. We will be discussing the power of literature to unearth the truth about how we live, and we will try and understand the role of writers in times of war and political upheavals. But first of all, I would like to introduce our special guests. Janika Perna, the current president of EUNIC Cluster New York, and Jörg Schumacher, EUNIC vice president, and directors and colleagues from other European culture institutes. And special thanks to the Katka Leon from the Czech Center, who again took on the preparation of the European Literature Night. If we can tempt you to extend your home library, there are some books on a sale downstairs or online, and thanks to EUNIC New York members, refreshment will be offered throughout the evening. The program will feature 2 panels discussion moderated by Sabir Sultan, the Associate Director of the World Voices Festival and Literary Programs. Welcome. And Clarice Rosas Sharif, Chief of Program Officer for Literary Programming. They are both from Pan America. So welcome. And let's dive to the diverse world of European literature and enjoy the evening. Clarice, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Actually, I would like to invite my panelists to come and sit at the table. I'll do a brief introduction and then join you. So if you can sit, yeah. So while we're getting settled, and I think we first I'd like to say thank you and just acknowledge maybe something that might not be obvious, but typically I prefer to be right there with you as a reader, as a lover of literature, as someone who grew up surrounded by books and raised by 2 high school teachers who I think thought the dinner table was also the classroom. I think I turned out okay, so I'm just grateful to them, but I'm also grateful to be in this room. It's obvious that there has been so much labor of love to create this convening tonight, and it feels good to be in community, together, in one space, in solidarity. And so I just wanted to just mention quickly PEN America, an organization of writers and champions of free expression. We celebrate the power of a written word. We champion the freedom to write, to read, the freedom of imagination. We are a member-driven organization, and we have members in the United States across all 50 states. And one of our most beloved programs is the World Voices Festival, started 20 years ago by Salman Rushdie and Esther Allen and Michael Reynolds as a tribute to the power of literature to really create a space for conversation across language, across differences, across borders, creating a space where a true exchange of ideas is possible, but also a space where we honor the role of writers and literature in our society, the way we turn to writers to understand ourselves, to understand the world that we live in. It's our pleasure to present the World Voices Festival every spring in New York City, and I invite all of you to join us next May. And it has been a true pleasure to be also in partnership with EUNIC New York and the Ukrainian Institute of America. It is, again, such an honor to partner with you this year. So thank you for inviting us. So now I'll introduce quickly our distinguished panelists, and then we'll get to it. So I don't think I have the right order, but I'll just follow the order on my paper. We have Kathleen Kaldma, who is the author of One is None. Here you go. I'll try not to look up so we can get through it. Author of One is None is a prize-winning Estonian poet, writer, and translator. She has published 5 poetry collections and a wide selection of prose books. She's President Emerita of PEN Estonia and served as International Secretary of PEN International. And if I have anything wrong, you'll correct me when I get to the table. We have Anya Kampmann, author of her debut novel, High as the Waters Rise. She's a German poet and author. Kampmann published her first novel in 2021, acclaimed as NPR's Best Book of the Year. Andrei Kurkov, author of Gray Bees, doesn't really need an introduction, but in the name of equity, I'll still introduce you formally, Andrei. He's a highly acclaimed Ukrainian writer, intellectual, and commentator on culture and politics. He's the author of 19 novels and 9 children's books. His books have been banned in Russia for almost 10 years. Sanay Lemoine is the author of A Margot Affair, her debut novel, and co-author of 2 cookbooks. She was a National Endowment for the Arts Fellow in 2022. She was born in Paris to a Japanese mother and a French father. She now lives in Brooklyn. I live in Brooklyn, so now we're sisters. Kat Mustatia is the creator of the augmented reality book Voidopolis. She's Romanian-American. She's a transmedia playwright and artist whose language and performance works and dig deeply into what it means to be human. So now we get to dive in, and I'll join you at the table. And I have these books here just as a reminder, subtle but not so subtle, the way we support our writers, the way we invest in our writers and literature is to also purchase their books. So buy a book for yourself, buy a book for a friend, buy a book for many, many people. And I think that they're available at the bookseller downstairs. I'd like to start with a kind of maybe easy question, but the one I care tremendously about because that's how I navigate the world every day. Meaning, where do you join us from? Where do you live, but where is home? And I'll start, I'll model. So, as I said, I join you tonight from Brooklyn. That's where I live with my family. And I've been in the United States for over maybe 25 years. I stopped counting at 20. But home is Martinique. And Martinique is a French island in the Caribbean. And it is what defines me as a reader, as a citizen of the world. And this is where, this is how I end up also here at this table. So, Sanay.
Thank you, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I love this question. It's so rare that we are asked. So I'm Sanai, the author of The Margot Affair, and my father is French, my mother is Japanese. I was born in France, but partly raised in Australia. And I've been living in the US since 2007, and New York for, I think, 12 years. And so this question always trips me up. But no, and I like home feels very much split today between France and New York. But I think there's something very distinct about France when I return there, from the smells, the sounds, the language, where my body just slips into this like state of, I don't know, of childhood, maybe. So I think if I have to choose one place, France, but New York is the place where I feel the most free and the most myself, which also feels important to the definition of home.
Wow. Good evening. Well, I was born in the Soviet Union, the country, thanks God, doesn't exist anymore. In Leningrad region. When I was less than 2 years old, my family moved to Ukraine, to Kiev. My grandmother lived in Kiev, so we stayed with her, and then we started living in our own small flat. So I grew up in Kiev, and from 1999, I spent every year 6 months touring or traveling around the world, sometimes with my book, sometimes without. And now, actually, I arrived to the States the day before yesterday from Munich. I was 70 days on the road, mostly in Europe, but also 2 nights in Canada. And now I'm here until beginning of January on the invitation of Columbia University.
Well, good evening. My name is Anja. I'm from Germany. I was raised in northern Germany. My parents grew up in this coal mining district at the Ruhr. So there were ancestors also coming from Poland who were like deep underground, and the other side were like from the north, and some of them were sailors, and so on the sea. So, and I live in Leipzig, and so I have a feeling sometimes that I still try to find out where this home is exactly. Sometimes it feels like northern Germany, sometimes where I live now, but it's the strange mixture between down under the earth and on the sea, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah. Hello? Is it working? I'm Kat Mustatia. I was born in Bucharest and immigrated to the US with my family during the Ceausescu regime, which was an unusual thing to do at the time. I was raised in Miami, Florida, and went to college in New York. And then as an adult, I lived for about a decade of my life in Berlin and Paris. To answer your question, I feel that home is the country of New York City. It is quite distinct from the United States. When I am in Europe, I feel very American. And when I am in the States, I feel quite European.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Just like Andrei, I was born in Soviet Union. I grew up in Middle East of Estonia, in a countryside, very, very small place, reading books, which was the only thing to do. Later on, when I was International Secretary of PEN, then I used to say that I live on airplanes, because basically I did not have a place. There was years I didn't have any keys in my bag to go back to. It was just like wherever I ended up, there I lived. My latest book is also called My Wings Are My Roots. So it's like you can see I'm still not, I haven't found a place yet. But it's like my, let's say my European triangle is Estonia, Iceland, Greece. So my favorite place in the world would be Icelandic people on the Greek island.
So, thank you so much for entertaining my first question. But I did have a suspicion that we would learn much more about who you are and who you are as a writer and your work if we started there, because I tried to introduce you with a formal biography, but it's not. We're full human beings, and there's so much more about us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about each of your books, and for the audience, as you know, our authors will read later. So we're not going to do a reading as part of this discussion, and as a way of talking about each of your work, I'm going to put Kat on the spot and start with you, because my question is, tell us about Voidopolis, but first, what is a book in from your point of view? Because I think you're trying to challenge us with Voidopolis and even questioning the very notion that we have of what is a book.
Yes. I'll try to explain in
Yes.
a couple of sentences. So I wrote a book that I call an augmented reality book that's made to disappear. The text and the imagery in the book is decayed via an algorithm. So the printed pages are illegible, and you are able to read this book through an augmented reality app. It's very easy. You don't have to download anything. You can just navigate to the right website. But only for a time, because the digital components begin to decay over a period of a few months until the app doesn't work anymore and you're left with this illegible object. Never fear, it resets every year on July 1st. So you do get a second chance. And right now it is reasonably legible. It'll be probably very legible until about February, until things will start to get dicey. I'll explain during the actual reading what made me do this. But the short answer is the subject matter was a retelling of Dante's Inferno as if I am wandering through New York City in the middle of a pandemic. And so the idea was to not only depict this sense of loss everywhere. The name tags have arrived. The idea was to not only depict this sense of loss, but to also embed loss in the very form of the book. And so this sense of disappearing, this fragility of this book object is part of its meaning. It's been recognized as a work of literature, which I'm very grateful for, but it's also been shown as an artistic object. And so when people ask me, well, what is this thing? I like to say it's a book thing. It's a performative book object. You get to be part of this audience if you choose to have it. You get to be part of this audience that is worldwide across all books, experiencing the decay and of the story and that fragility over and over again every year. So what is a book? It still involves a cover, but I think that the challenge here with this one was to really play with that format. And for me, I do come from live performance and from theater, so it didn't seem so strange to try to make a book enact something inside of its pages in a more performative way.
Thank you, Kat. And I think you challenging us. I mean, I don't know about you, but I traveled and moved so many times. I've never left without my books, if I could. And I know some people cannot. We'll talk about the terrible things that are happening in this world, and sometimes we lose what's most precious in the book. But your artifact, it's illegible as an artifact, but then you force people to have an experience with it, and some of the experience is collective, because if you're reading it in the same month, you're all reading the same thing. And so it's I can't wait for you to hear more from Kat. And thank you for sharing this work with us. Sanait, do you mind telling us a little bit about your work?
Sure. So I published my first novel, The Margot Affair, in 2020, June 2020. And it was a book that I had spent almost 8 years writing. I started working on it in my early 20s, right when I moved to New York, actually. And it's a novel that takes place in Paris. I wrote it in English, but the entire story takes place in France with French characters. And it's told from the perspective of a 17-year-old girl who is the hidden illegitimate daughter of an affair between a stage actress and a politician. And her entire life, she's been a secret. And then one day at a party, she meets a journalist, and she confides in him and makes the reckless decision to tell him about her father's identity. He's a famous politician who has his official family that he lives with, and then this other secret family. And then from one day to the next, her life dramatically changes. And so it's this sort of personal upheaval, this story of familial bonds changing in a very kind of sudden way. And I can continue, or I can stop there. Yeah.
Yeah. Why did you have to write this book? Tell us what it is about, but what was your motivation, or your, why did it have to be done, or what was the spark?
It's a good question. It's because it's quite far from me. It's a story about an oil rig worker, Václav, who's like 52 years old. He's been in the business for more than 12 years. And at the beginning of the story, his closest friend and bunkmate goes missing in a stormy night, and he sets out for a journey. He's a character who really doesn't reflect upon himself much. So I did a lot of this kind of work through language and through the kind of the way he perceives the world. And it started off as a short story because I was wondering about these oil rig workers and what kind of dream they were chasing. What is this idea of freedom and the big sea and going to places. And he's a character who comes from a very small background, growing with Polish parents, and he grew up in this coal mining district. So for him, it's at some stage it's a big promise to go there. And I was wondering what kind of promises we as humans face or chase, what we are looking for. And then he's someone who, like, from the standpoint of the people he grew up with, everything he does would be quite exotic. But how do we find meaning in this very vast world? How can we connect to it? So it is really a story about this sort of globalized working place, or the people who work there. And I think I came up with it because I know so many people who sort of suffer this sort of flexibility. That this people always tell them, you just go there for 3 years and then you will go to another place. And I was also wondering, what is the cost? What do we pay? And also, and then there were so many aspects which I could sort of combine and so I just couldn't stop.
I'm glad you didn't. Kathleen, in an interview that you gave, I'm not sure, I don't have a timestamp, but you were described as an exporter of Estonian literature, an importer of foreign literature. And something about it I was just like, that's a cool title. I don't know, like I think it's great. But can you talk about your work in that way, in terms of what are you writing for?
Regarding the importing of Estonian literature, I was working at the Estonian Children's Literature Center as the promoter of Estonian children's literature. I got really great results in my second year. I think the percentage, like the plus of Estonian children's literature being published abroad was like 360%. So it's like a huge, huge effort and great results. And I have besides writing myself, I have translated more than 50 books of finest literature into Estonian. So yes, I have worked both ways. And for myself, also, I don't write about Estonia.
I know.
That's why I want you to tell us. I write about Iceland. I write about the world, the Greece. So it's. As my daughter said, there are many books have been written about Estonia already, mother. Don't worry about it. It's like I follow my heart, and my heart is nomad. So.
And one is, I'm sorry, one is none. Tell us a little more about that.
That is a selection from my previous poetry book before that, which was called in Estonian The Alphabet of Love, where during the last big crisis, financial and whatnot, everything got so negative. And I decided that I will look at everything in life through the perspective of love. And it sort of turned things around for me. And then I made this alphabet of love. And it was a great book, even if I say so myself. I also invented some new characters into this alphabet. And this book has been, in a way, translated into many languages, not just this little, very small volume in English was the first one, but also Greek version, Slovenian, Spanish, and some others. So it's like the story is still traveling. And every book is different, because as you can imagine, like the alphabets are different, the vocabulary is different. So it's like my translated books and poetry books, they are very different, always. As a translator, I gave free hands to translators to do whatever they want to do.
Thank you. And Andre, I'd like you to tell us a little about Great Bees, but I'm also conscious of where we are. And you just arrived in New York, and we had, such a beautiful tribute to writers we lost. And so at a certain level, you sitting on this panel have a particularly, a particular connection with where we are, where your work, what you wanted to express or do with this work of fiction. But what would you like to say today about the work, but also the moment that we're in?
Well, in January this year, in the end of January, I was with Victoria Amelina in Cartagena for the Hay Festival. And we were talking about Ukraine, and the Colombian colleagues were there, actually. They were starting pro-Ukrainian campaign Aguanta Ukraina. Yeah, and it's difficult to imagine that now actually Amelina Victoria is not with us, yeah. But she was writing about Ukraine. I'm writing always about Ukraine, except for one book which I wrote about Lithuania and Europe. And this book actually, it's about 3 Ukraines: occupied Ukraines, annexed Ukraine, and free Ukraine. And I would say, this book didn't want me to write it in a way, because I had lots of doubts whether it is moral to write about the war when the war is not over. But this book is not about fighting. It's about gray zone between positions of the separatists and Russian army and Ukrainian positions. And I traveled in the war zone 3 times, and once with my colleagues, 2 of my colleagues, we went all the way of the front line, 430 kilometers to Severodonetsk, to the border between Lugansk region and Russia. And I met lots of people there, of course, soldiers and civilians. And in 2017, there were already more than 200 books about the war, written mostly by the veterans, by the volunteers, by the soldiers. And they were mostly diaries and non-fiction books. But what I noticed that there was not a single book about civilians who got caught in this war. And I decided to give them voice. So, this is a novel about 2 last remaining villagers in the gray zone, in the village abandoned by everybody else, where there is no electricity for 4 years already, where there are no shops, authorities, police, pharmacy, nothing. And one is actually living on one street facing the positions of the separatists. And my main character, beekeeper Sergei, with his bees, lives on facing actually positions of the Ukrainian army. And in the beginning of the war, he doesn't understand what is happening, but he is defending his bees. And I should say, again, thank you to Lithuania, because for this book, I went to Lithuania to take lessons in beekeeping. And my teacher was a retired minister of police in small town Anekshai. Yeah, so this is a book about ordinary humans, ordinary civilians who have to deal with the war, who have to understand what is happening because they were not politicized before, because they didn't care about politics. And actually, the main plot is that the story begins in the winter, and the main character, Sergei, he understood that the honey, because of the war, is bitter, because the gunpowder from the shells is falling on the flowers, and then the pollen, contaminated pollen, is collected by the bees and turned into honey. So he dreams to take the bees on holiday in the summer, far away from the war, so that they could actually collect pollen on the normal, peaceful fields. And he goes first to Zaporizhia region, to the south of Ukraine, which was at that time free. And then he goes to Crimea and experiences the life in annexed Crimea and witnesses the life and the treatment of Crimean Tatars there. So it's like, it's about honey, it's about bees, it's about the war, it's about human nature. But first of all, it is a human story. Yeah.
And thank you, Andre. And so I think I want to talk about now, maybe, in this discussion, we said we were going to talk about the global crisis and the relationship with, I guess, what it means to create literature in these times. And one, I think we may have collectively on this panel a different ranking or a definition of what even constitute a global crisis. I mean, so I'll just say what I had in mind, and then it started to be a long list, and I was like, okay, I should stop. But I think the first one for me, because I feel like I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, is the global pandemic. That in a way, it doesn't matter where we were geographically speaking, it doesn't matter where home was. We all experience facets in different ways, but we all experience, being home, losing many people, things coming to a standstill, maybe going inside, meaning in the home, but also inside ourselves, and asking, what are we supposed to do now? Where do we find joy? Where do we find the solution? So the pandemic was on my mind. The migration and refugee crisis. I'm not a refugee, but I don't live at home, and my family is also very spread around the world. And so I think about all these people who are moving in this global world, climate change, and of course, wars. The atrocities of wars, the losses connected to wars, Ukraine and the many others. We're also turning the news when we go home and having to witness more war scenes. And then the threats to democracy. So I'll just say, in the US, I feel that in the last few years, I would say since 2016, it's almost like there's an alternate reality that I live in, And then I try to convince myself that at some point the book will end and we'll return to normal, programming. So this is how I define, I was thinking about the global crisis, but I wanted to ask you, do you think about that? How do you think about that when you go to the page? Are you trying to write to the present? Are you trying to actually do the very opposite? Are you writing about the individual lives and the people's as a way to not write about the present or as a way to understand the present? I don't want to assume any of this because on this panel, I'm the reader, I'm not the writer. So I want you to tell us a little more about it. What as a writer, how do you face the times we're in and what you want to put on the page or how you approach it? And I'll ask any of you to jump in. I'm a child of a teacher, so I'm also really happy when I get to call on people. But no, please jump in. Anyone? Kat? See, I can't help it.
So I think of this book that I made in a time of crisis, and in New York City, just to clarify, because it was one of the first epicenters for the pandemic, it seemed unique in its misery at the time. Of course, the pandemic would then be experienced worldwide by everyone, but there was something about that shock of being the first and the disorientation. I think what I was up to was that I wanted to tell a story in that moment that would reflect that moment's kind of suspension of all rules of daily life, of what we understood as engagement on social media or anywhere else. I wanted to be able to reflect that, but I also felt like I don't want to write a book about this time. I started writing this narrative actually on Instagram because I wanted to be able to eventually, once I was done, delete it all and make room for that hope that the pandemic would be over, that we would come out on the other side, and that we wouldn't have to carry that memory burden anymore. And by being able to delete it, maybe there was going to be a possibility to make room for joy, the joy that we had lost. Now, it's what I think what I probably have to contribute to a panel about world literature and crisis, or literature and crisis, is the notion that I wrote the story in 2020 and 2021. And then just as I was had made my peace with this was going to be a book now, 2022 rolled around and war in Ukraine started. And the cruel joke was, oh, I thought that was hell, and now here's this fresh hell. And now this year there's a fresh hell. And so there you have it. You might imagine that you're living through the worst thing possible, and there's always more, apparently.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like we are now always in a time of crisis. And there are also the personal ones that we traverse. When my novel came out, it was middle of June 2020, and here I was having written a book that is set in Paris and that I hoped would make people travel maybe, and it's and I thought, oh my goodness, how can I publish this book? And so I wrestled with that question a lot of what is this work that we do as writers? Writing a book is so difficult. We are not receiving paychecks for this for the most part. And yet, I come back to the page and I turned to books my entire life. I had very silent parents, so my whole life was reading books and on the page. And the way that I approach writing, which I think echoes the way that I read as well, is very much through the very specific individual lives of characters and bringing those characters to life for the reader through feelings and sensory details and whatever provides a bridge to the reader. And even in a story like the novel that I'm working on right now takes place in the mid-1980s in Argentina after the end of the military dictatorship. And so we feel history pressing on the characters, and we feel like that the tension is always there. But I'm interested in how that manifests in a friendship, how like trauma might resurface in a conversation between two new friends. And so that's what I'm always seeking for. And I also, and this is just the way that like writing happens for me organically, but I rarely start with an idea or a goal. It's sometimes like the smallest feeling, like maybe a feeling of distance between two characters, and then with the writing and with the sentence, I start to excavate that and discover it, and so it's very much sort of like coming to life as I am writing it.
First of all, I should say that pandemic was very kind to writers. Yeah, because we suddenly got lots of readers who didn't have a choice. Yeah, I mean, for booksellers, it was also a good time. When the new invasion started, it was completely different story, because in one day, 99% of fiction writers in Ukraine stopped writing fiction. And then most of them decided to write non-fiction, and they are still doing so. Several writers who still write novels, I mean, they look like heroes, but at the same time they are criticized, I think, loudly or silently, yes. But I mean, I'm following one writer who still writes crime stories, Enrico Kotyuha, and one writer who is writing science fiction, very good science fiction, Maxim Kidruk, who are doing the events in spite of the war, who are collecting during the events money for the Ukrainian army for the humanitarian purposes. But generally, I mean, these last 2 years, and I don't know how many months more, it will be not very good time for Ukrainian literature, because I don't know any love stories written or adventure stories or mainstream novels or family sagas. So I mean, we are in the time of the concentrated pain, and actually documentary pain. I mean, what was Victoria Emiliana doing? She was documenting the crime. So actually every writer is now documenting the crime. So documenting the lives of people affected by the crimes of Russian army. And what will you do with this huge number of books and texts after the war? I mean, will it cause national depression? Will it dominate in the national literature? How can one imagine that the normality will return to literary scene, that people will say that, well, it's now enough about the war, let's write books for children? And so I'm afraid, actually, of the time after the war, because the whole cultural production is already centered around the war. And if in the beginning of the invasion people were rushing to the theaters because they could see the plays, classical plays and foreign plays which had nothing to do with Ukrainian reality, now they are watching the plays about the war. So I mean, there is no escape now. and how, I mean, the worst situation would be if the same thing happens that happened in the Soviet Union after the Second World War, when the war literature became ultra-patriotic and became an instrument of education and upbringing. And I hope it will not happen, because then you don't have normal situation neither in culture nor in literature.
Thank you, Andre. I have a follow-up question, but I want to hear from Anya and Kathleen, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I come from the from silence. My family was very silent. There was no talk about realities. So I grew up a true Soviet child. Lenin was my big friend. Everybody wants to be like Lenin. Kathleen wants to be like Lenin because there's no other better person than Lenin. But maybe his sister, but probably not. And I write to open up the silence, and that's why it has been very important for me to work with pen and to help other writers to do the same, to get out of the silence. So, for example, I was in the National Secretary, and with the COVID, there was no time for us to write or to do something nice things or even think about getting sick, because it's like 2020 when it all started. Then you have coup in Myanmar, Afghanistan, Belarus, Ukraine, and there is like never stops. The work never stops. You have to 24/7. You have meetings. You have crisis every day. So that was my corona. I was basically on Zoom meetings and trying to help our colleagues to get out of the difficult situations and to be able to speak about whatever they want to speak about, whether they want to speak about war or peace. So that is their choice. But yeah, that's my 5 cents.
Thank you. Anya?
Yes. I think what we can really do when we write is to sort of create a relation to a topic which wasn't there before. Or I think the husband of Hannah Arendt once said that in philosophy the biggest task is to ask questions that we haven't heard before, or that we are not used to. And when I write, I also write poetry. I always try to find a perspective and a voice, and to sort of give the reader a chance to connect. And in this case of like writing the book, it was also the time of big refugee crisis, and there are several scenes which are set in Morocco, and you would find like the main character at New Year looking over to the Spanish coast, and there are a lot of people and I think it's you just get a feeling for those people standing there, and they see the fireworks on the other side. So that would be one way to sort of deal with it. And then I was also wondering about like crises which don't really get into the news, like for example with this oil rig worker. And there are a lot of, oftentimes it is said in the book that when the oil field is emptied, they just move on and move somewhere else. And normally this sensation of an empty oil field, it doesn't have a name, it doesn't have a place. It's hard to write about it. But when you have a character who sort of feels that he himself is sort of emptied and doesn't have a place anymore, and he's sort of, his whole life is connected to this world of these oil fields, it somehow, at least that's my hope, becomes something we can have a relationship to. So I think In general, when we talk about crisis in literature, we are much slower, of course, than the news, but we have we have very different. We can create a lot of layers. We have language, we have rhythm, and we've got like a title like "Grey Bees" from Andre. I mean, grey bees. It's it opens up such a broad space, and I think that's what we can really do to sort of get the attention and shift, and shift the thinking somehow. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. And we have to close, unfortunately, because we have a wonderful next panel. And in closing, I would just say that Salman Rushdie at the festival in 2022, actually, Andre, you were there too. He had this wonderful quote, I won't read it, but he said that the writers own the future. And I just feel that in this room, maybe we end on a note of hope. And I think if you on this stage own the future, I feel better and I'm hopeful. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
Thanks you to the authors. We will hear more of them during the evening. Thank you for Clarissa Rosas Sharif. And I would like to ask my Portuguese colleague to introduce the tribute to the poet.
Thank you, Mirek. Thank you, EUNIC and Mirek and the Czech Center for organizing this wonderful event so that we have the pleasure to participate in. I would like to, first of all, thank and acknowledge the presence of our Consul General of Portugal in New York, Ambassador Luisa Pais Low. Thank you so much for being here. And we will pay a tribute to three wonderful poets that would complete 100 years in 2023. A lady and two gentlemen of the Portuguese poetry that in their own time, they marked our cultural scene in Portugal. And I have the pleasure and the honor to be accompanied by the Portuguese guitarist, Pedro Henriques da Silva. Dr. Pedro Henriques da Silva is a professor of Portuguese guitar, and he will delight you with some pieces. And in my not so good ability to recite poems, I will try to do my best. I will recite one poem from each of them in Portuguese so that you can enjoy the magical language that we have and want to share with you, and in English so that everyone is able to understand what they meant to say. So the first poet is Natalia Correia. Natalia was born in 2023, and she was a poet, a social activist, a member of parliament, a defender of human rights and women's rights, and she was a central figure of our scene, of our cultural scene in the 60s, 70s, and till the day she passed away in 1993. Natalia Correia, the poem, I will recite it in Portuguese. O poema. O poema não é o canto que do grilo para a rosa cresce. O poema é o grilo, é a rosa e é aquilo que cresce. É o pensamento que exclui uma determinação na fonte de onde ele flui e naquilo que descreve. O poema é o que no homem para lá do homem se atreve. Os acontecimentos são pedras e a poesia transcende-las na já longínqua noção de descrevê-las. E essa própria noção é só uma saudade que se desvanece na poesia, pura intenção de cantar o que não se conhece. The poem. The poem is not the song. that grows from the cricket to the rose. The poem is the cricket. It is the rose in which that it grows. It is a thought that excludes the determination in the source from which it flows and what it describes. The poem is that in a man beyond the man dares. Events are stones, and poetry transcends them in the already distant notion of describing them. And that very notion is only a longing that fades in poetry, pure intention to sing of what you do not know. Our second author, who would complete 100 years this year, is Eugênio de Andrade, a pseudonym of José Fontainhas. He was born in 2023 and he passed away in 2005. He was a Portuguese poet, very influenced by surrealism, and used concrete images that include earth, water, and the human body to explore such themes as love, nature, and death. His work is widely translated. And the poem I will recite, and then Pedro will compose, it's called Words. As palavras. São como cristal, as palavras. Algumas, punhal, incêndio. Outras, orvalho apenas. Secretas vêm, cheias de memórias. Inseguras navegam, barcos ou beijos. As águas estremecem. Desamparadas, inocentes, leves, tecidas são de luz. E são a noite. E mesmo pálidas, verdes paraísos lembram ainda. Quem as escuta? Quem as recolhe, assim, cruéis, desfeitas, nas suas conchas puras? Words. They are like crystal. Words. Some a dagger. Some a blaze. Others merely dew. Secretly they come, full of memory. Insecurely they sail, cockle boats or kisses, the waters trembling. Abandoned, innocent, weightless. They are woven of light, they are the night. And even pallid, they recall green paradise. Who hears them? Who gathers them? Thus cruel, shapeless, in their pure shells. And our last poet for the night, it's Mario Cesarini. Mario Cesarini, similarly to the other two great poets. And this, Pedro will play the longest theme. He was a surrealist poet and a painter. He has major works, and he was creative, and he gave us a poem called Poem that I'm very happy to recite, and it's a very innovative poem. Poema. Faz-se luz pelo processo de eliminação de sombras. Ora, as sombras existem. As sombras não têm exaustiva vida própria. Não de um e do outro lado da luz, mas no próprio seio dela. Intensamente amantes, loucamente amadas, espalham pelo chão braços de luz cinzenta que se introduzem pelo bico nos olhos do homem. Por outro lado, a sombra de tal luz não ilumina realmente os objetos. Os objetos vivem às escuras, numa perpétua aurora surrealista com a qual não podemos contactar, senão como os amantes de olhos fechados e lâmpadas nos dedos e na boca. Poem. Light occurs when shadows are eliminated. Shadows are what exists. Shadows have their own exhaustive light. Not on this or that side of the light, but in its very heart. Intensely loving, insanely beloved. And they spread over the ground, their arms of gray light that enter human eyes at the corners. On the other hand, the shadow called light doesn't illuminate objects really. Objects live in the dark, in a perpetual surrealist aurora, which we cannot contact, except the way lovers do, with eyes closed and lamps in our fingers, lamps in our lips. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you, Jose. And now it's time for our second panel. So I would like to invite the moderator, Sabri Sultan from the Pan America, to introduce his guest.
Thank you. That's the right energy. So I will keep this introduction brief. I want to echo Clarice's thanks to EUNIC New York and to the Ukrainian Institute, and particularly thanks to Katerina from the Czech Institute for all of her incredible work this evening. Yes. And so tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce our panel, The Past is Present. I want to invite our panelists to come up and take a seat wherever they'd like. And then, so to introduce our incredible panelists, we have Anna Freilich, author of The Ghost of Shakespeare. Anna has taught Polish language and literature at Columbia University for over 3 decades. She has also written 10 books of poetry and 3 bilingual editions. She received the Knight's Cross of the Order of Merit, awarded by the President of Poland. Lima Vince, author of, author of Matilda Olkinaite, Unlocked Diary, has published over 20 books in the United States, Europe, and the United Kingdom. She has received recognition for her Lithuanian to English translations for the past 30 years. Next is Katerina Tukova. She is the author of the international bestseller, The Last Goddess. She is a Czech novelist and curator and has received the Czech State Award for Literature for the novel Bila Voda and her body of work. Finally, we have Carmen Uribe, who is the author of 4 novels and 2 poetry collections, including The Past Life of Dolphins. He won the National Prize for Literature in Spain for his first novel, Bilbao, New York, Bilbao, which has been translated into over 15 languages. And unfortunately, Laura Segal won't be able to join our panel this evening. However, you can hear her read from her book, Ladies' Lunch, later tonight. And so, without further ado, let's start. So it is a pleasure to be in conversation with all of you tonight. And I know we have a big topic, the past is present. But I think an easy way to get into it might be a sort of soft landing where I'd like to ask each of you to begin by talking about your book and then discussing the ways your book wrestles with history, with past cultural figures. And so why don't we begin down at the end with Carmen, and we'll work our way back up.
Hello, thank you for everybody for coming. Thank you, Sabir. It's a pleasure to be with you here. So, yeah, my novel, the title of my novel is The Past Life of Dolphins, and it comes from a ancient Basque and Atlantic legend that says that dolphins before they were humans, but they became dolphins because they love mermaids. So after being the lovers of mermaids, they become dolphins. So it could be bad or good, I don't know. Anyway, I use this Basque legend, ancient Basque legend, to talk about migrants because I think that migrants also are transformed when they go to one place to another, but not just themselves or ourselves. It's my case too. Also, their past also change, also is transformed, because it's not this, the relationship with the past is different when you are in your hometown or when you migrated to another place. So the relationship it's different, because the past, it's like it's a kind of fiction. It's a kind of fiction when you leave your country. So why we came here? We came here because I got a Kulmar Fellowship at the New York Public Library to do research about an amazing character, an amazing woman, an amazing migrant who came to the United States in the early 20th century. Because she was Hungarian, she was feminist, suffragette, but she had to flee Europe because she couldn't live there, no? Because of the Nazis and because of the communists, both reasons. So she came here and she was living here. She was really, really well known in the United States. She was friend of Einstein, of Gandhi. But then in the Cold War, she died and she went into a complete oblivion. So she was completely forgotten. So I came to the library and I found that there was a book about her that, because her secretary wanted to write a biography about her, and she was writing that book for 40 years. 40 years writing the same book, can you imagine? and she never finished the book. So, yeah, so I found that unfinished book in the New York Public Library about that so amazing woman. And I think to myself, wow, an unfinished book. So Borges or Bolaño would have killed for it. So that's the story of the novel.
40 years is terrible, but I can imagine. I wrote my last book for 10 years, and I was lucky enough to finish it. But 40 years, oh my God. Oh, well, so hello everyone. It's really nice to be here, and at first let me introduce my book, or to tell something about something that connects all my books. I turn to the past usually for the topics which interests me, because I'm a woman, and I think that in the past there is a lot of topics and themes which could be told from the women perspective, and I think that we are lacking of these stories still, and especially in Czech history, there are still a lot of to write about in this sense. The same thing I can say about the book The Last Goddess, which describes the story of let's say wise women or healers who lived in the Czech-Slovak borders in Central Europe. There are white Carpathian mountains, so it was healers from the hills who were very helpful for whole the society who lived there, and they cured people for generations. They had deep knowledges of herbal treatment, and they helped to people to treat their illnesses, to help their body and mind, and they were also able to mend broken bones. They were also believed that they had some supernatural abilities, like they were able to see into the future and conducted something which we can call love magic, but also they were renowned for, some of them were renowned for making something what we can call black masses to cause someone's death, for example. So they were something like, I don't know, we can tell, shaman of this community. Either we believe in these supernatural abilities or not, still they were able to help people through herbal treatment. And there's abilities, their art of healing was passed down from mother to daughter through centuries. Scientists believe that their art comes from the pagan time. The ethnologist and anthropologist see the proof in the enchanting and rituals which were accompanied with enchanting which was told in very old Czech language. That's why they thought it's so old, all these abilities, all the art. And it was interesting, or what interests me the most on this story or these women was that they were a lot of time illiterate, not ordinary but still village women, but they were always the threat for the authoritarian system, if we can call Catholic Church authoritarian system. For example, two of them were killed in 17th century during the witch trials. They were also threat for the Nazi regime or Nazi, the commando of intellectuals was called as Hexensonderkommando. It was composed from the writers, historians, and scientists who made a research connected with the goddesses' power. So they considered them also something like, not exactly threat, but really interesting for their own use. And they were also threat for the communist regime, which finally destroyed them. It was the biggest power, the communist regime, because it has its clever tools how to destroy such a phenomenon. And for me was really interesting why these women who were so important for the local community was always seen as a threat, and why they were forgotten, because now today no of the goddesses is still alive, unfortunately. The last one died in the year 2001. Her name was Irma Gabrhelová. And before I started to write about them, and before I offered the story to the readers, they were completely forgotten after the many centuries. And I think that to return to the past or to the history of these interesting women is important for us like Czech community or Czech people, to understand more our cultural heritage, our interesting and rich history, and that it was pity to forget such a valuable story, which if it would survive, could be something which we can be proud of and to offer the world as something really interesting. So I think that our past hides a lot of stories which could be lighted on and offered to the readers, and that here was a lot of stories which were forgotten or silenced in some cases, really uselessly. I forgot the word, sorry. But it is necessary to offer such a stories to the wide audience, to be more educated and more known about their own history.
Hello. I am going to buy your book. So I love this. I love this. In fact, my name is a goddess name. Laima is goddess of fortune in Lithuanian. So I'm Laima Vince, and so I was born here in the New York area. My mother was born here in the New York area, but I am the daughter of a World War II refugee from Lithuania and the granddaughter of a diplomat in exile. My grandfather, Anitzeta Simutis, was the consul general of pre-war independent Lithuania on the west side, on West 86th Street, you know, on a shoestring budget, keeping the spirit of independent Lithuania alive. And so I have really spent my life going backwards into the past, uncovering my Lithuanian identity. But part of my Lithuanian identity is also understanding the Litvak, or Lithuanian Jewish identity. And something that's very important to know about this project of mine of bringing Matilda Olkinaitė's poetry and her diary and researching her life and bringing all that to life in the English language and English language translation is that I felt very strongly that her voice had been silenced as a young woman poet, and her voice needed to be heard. Her voice needed to be heard. So I feel in many ways that I'm speaking for Matilda when I talk about her. So there are many levels of serendipity to Matilda's story. And I should start with something very personal, that growing up here in the New York area, during the Cold War years, when we had little to no contact with Lithuania, Lithuania just seemed like this fantasy land, some story land. In fact, Lithuania did not even exist on the map. So when I was growing up in typical in American elementary schools, first day of school, teachers asked, well, where are your parents from? Where are you from? And I would say Lithuania. And they said, well, show us on the map. And I'd look at the map and I'd see this big red blob, the Soviet Union. I'm like, and they say, well, where is Lithuania? There is no such thing. And so I was always treated as this strange child who was making up fantasy lands and living in her imagination. And I think that I eventually just slipped into my imaginary lands and became a writer and an artist. But throughout my childhood, I had this recurring dream. And in this dream, I was with a few other girls, and I was a teenage girl in the dream. And we were running through a pine forest, and we were being pursued by men in uniform who wanted to kill us. And they finally caught up to us, and each girl is shot one by one, and then I'm shot. And I would have this dream, and later I went to high school in Germany, and I continued having this dream. Now, in the Cold War era, for us, what we knew about the Holocaust, we did not know about the Holocaust by bullets that had taken place in Eastern Europe. We only knew the version of Auschwitz and the gas chambers and what played out towards the end of World War II. So this dream was unfathomable to me. I couldn't understand where it came from. But I do know now that it was coming from some kind of collective unconscious, some kind of knowing. Many Lithuanians rescued Jewish neighbors and friends during the Holocaust in Lithuania, during the German occupation of Lithuania. In fact, statistically, by number of ratio of population, Lithuania is second to the Netherlands in the number of people who risked their lives to help save their Jewish friends and neighbors. But at the same time, there were Lithuanians who collaborated. So it's a very complicated story, and both of those elements are a part of Matilda's story. So now let's fast forward 2017. I was teaching literature in Beijing for a American cultural exchange program, but I was also writing my PhD dissertation at Vilnius University in Lithuania, and my theme was memory and post-memory. And I was looking very closely at memoir by first-generation Litvak Holocaust survivors, for example, Samuel Bach's Painted in Words, and then what Lithuanian Christians had experienced during World War II, deportations to Siberia, Soviet occupation, Soviet repressions, the post-war anti-Soviet resistance. So I was looking at these two pieces, but then I was looking at memoirs written by second and third generation Lithuanian American writers who were writing in English, some of them coming from the Jewish line and some from that Christian line. So this was my topic, and I had come back to Lithuania during autumn holidays. I had to do some work at the university. And a Litvak friend of mine, Phil Shapiro, wrote me an email, and he said, there's this amazing young woman in the Rokiškis region who has brought back to life the story of a young poet killed in the Holocaust by bullets in Lithuania, Matilda Olkinaitė, and it's a story based on her poems and her diary. And he said, why don't you go and see it? So I said, okay, that sounds very interesting. I think I'll go. And I was at a poetry festival in the southern part of Lithuania, and I remember I drove for 5 hours in the dark, in the rain. It was autumn, and I managed to get to the theater like literally 5 minutes before the performance was about to start. And I brought a friend of mine along with me who's an ethnographer, because I felt she could be very helpful with interpreting this story. And as we were watching this story, and mind you, this was not a professional theater, this is community theater. So the actors are local teachers, construction workers, just regular people. And the story really was, they had taken Matilda Olkinaitė's poetry, which was written in Lithuanian, because she went to Lithuanian schools, even though she was Jewish, and her diary, and performed the story of her childhood up until when her family is killed in the Holocaust. And my friend and I, we were just like, we had tears pouring down our face. We were so moved. But I was listening to her poetry. I said, wait a minute, people have said, oh, this is the poetry that a young girl wrote in her diary. I said, well, no. I mean, she really knew what she was doing as a poet. I mean, there's like very distinct prosody in her poems, and I felt that she was, because I was a folk singer in Lithuanian, and so I knew the rhythms and the images of Lithuanian folk song. She grew up in the countryside singing Lithuanian folk songs, and those rhythms and repetitions and refrains were worked into the poems, but then there was Jewish imagery from the Old Testament, and there were poems that questioned, what does it mean to be Jewish on the eve of World War II, when she knew about what was going on in Nazi Germany just over the border. So I thought, this is really, I really was very, very moved. And the play ended, and what I found out was that many of those actors were descendants of people who had lived in Matilda's village, where she was murdered by Lithuanian collaborators, she and her family. And so it was very emotional for them because they were also connected to the story. So it's almost like the whole theater is crying, the actors are crying, the director is crying. It's extremely emotional and cathartic experience. And then the director of the play comes on stage and says, I heard there's a Lithuanian American literary translator in the audience, and we want her to translate Matilda's poems. And I was like, whoa, that's a big responsibility. But after the play, I went and I introduced myself, and we immediately bonded, and we kind of like had this vision that we wanted to publish. First, we wanted to have Matilda's poems published in Lithuanian and her diary so that people in Lithuania could read it, but then to translate and publish into English. And that led me to actually, getting to see and touch and, the actual diary and poems. And there's a very long story about how the poems survived that's very, very interesting. And it involves so many levels of serendipity. And if you come to the breakout session later, you'll hear all about it. But long story short, the notebook of poems and Matilda's diary had ended up in the possession of the Holocaust survivor Irena Veisaitė, who herself had been rescued as a 13-year-old girl during the Holocaust by a Lithuanian family. And so these artifacts were precious to her. So she allowed me to photograph on my phone the poems and the pages of the diary. So when I started translating Matilda's work, I was literally just, using the handwritten text from photos on my phone because we didn't have anything else to work with. But I was very determined for her voice to be heard there was a local Lithuanian historian whose parents had known Matilda's family, had known of the murders, Violeta Alekniene, and she had done research on Matilda's life and had really uncovered a lot of facts. So she showed me around the town that she came from, shared a lot of her research with me, which was the foundation of my work. But then I also had the great good fortune to meet and spend time with Matilda's close childhood friend who she had grown up with, a woman named Lucia. And so she really brought to life everything that Matilda wrote about in her poems and her diary. In fact, one of the poems that we recovered, she had memorized it. It had appeared in a magazine, but it wasn't written down in her notebook. So she recited the poem to me and the director from the theater, and we wrote it down, and then I also translated it. So it's been, there were so many people jumped in and helped with research. Then we started finding that since age 9, indeed, her poems were being published in Lithuanian children's magazines, but we had to find the evidence. So there were researchers from the Rokiškis Museum in Lithuania who were incredible, and they went through the archives, they found copies of those poems. Other people, there's too many people to name, but a lot of different, it was really a group project pulling together all the research and the photographs and documentation and whatever we could find. The book, The Unlocked Diary, I really owe a debt of gratitude to the artist Sigutė Cheblinskaitė for her beautiful design of the book and all the work she did pulling documents and photographs from the archives. This little book, this little chapbook is published by ARC Publications, and it contains a selection of Matilda's poetry in Lithuanian and in English, and my essay, introductory essay. So that's probably a lot more easily available, to order, and we have copies here because the book that was published in Lithuania, unfortunately, we don't have very many copies left because it was a very small print run. So that was the whole story of Matilda's, to allow her to speak, because one thing that she wrote in her diary was she perceived herself as a poet. She wanted to be a poet. She wanted to write. She wanted to publish her first book. But she was also anti-communist. And although her brother joined the Communist Party, so it was interesting how different ideologies in one family. And she wrote in her diary that she refuses to write odes to Stalin, that she's not going to write propagandistic poetry about a bright tomorrow, that she is going to write about the pain of centuries and what she needs to write about. And she acknowledges, it's very sad for her, but she felt like she would never see her poems published. But another aspect of her poetry was she had this vision. She was visionary. She really foresaw what would happen to the Jewish population of Lithuania. It's in her poems. She foresaw what would happen. So I hope I haven't taken up too much time, but there's so much to say about Matilda, really. Okay, well, thank you for listening.
Well, I don't know where to start. I would say the book that is here presented is actually it's not what I really have written for my whole life, because I started in the grade school as a poet, and in Poland, and I have written poetry since then and published. I published actually my first 4 books of poetry were published when I was already on exile, I would say. My family were Polish Jews living in Galicia, Lwów mainly, and they survive. My father in Ural and my mother with me in Kyrgyzstan. I was born in Kyrgyzstan. And of course, when we were returning to Poland, there was no return to Lviv and Lviv now, right? And I grew up in Szczecin, a town to which I was very strongly attached, and I am still in very close contact with the people at the university and writers in Szczecin. However, I did not stay long in Poland because I grew up in Szczecin, and then I went to university in Warsaw, and then I worked in the magazine for blind people. However, there was this war in Israel in 1967, right? And it sort of ignited in Poland quite strong anti-Semitic policy of the communist regime, and we emigrated with my husband and our 2-year-old son. And actually, my poetry is mainly, a very big part on the living through exile, the pain of exile, and at a certain point, the joy or whatever of assimilation. I don't have my poetry book. I write a little bit of prose also, but the book which we present here is my mainly on my scholarly research, and this is how did it come. Do I have still a few minutes, right? When I came to the United States, I started to publish my poetry in London in the Emigre magazine, Wiadomości. And that was magazine read in London, in the United States, by Polish emigre circles from the World War II. And at certain point, I thought my life has ended when I came here. I didn't know the language. I had only master's degree. But at certain point, I met a professor of New York University, Zoya Yuriev, and when she heard my name, she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm working in the laboratory." She said, "Your place is at the university. Apply and I will write you letter of recommendations." She knew my poetry, and that was my recommendation. So the most part of the book is contains my articles on Polish poetry, then on Polish prose, and then on Russian symbolism. And why on symbolism? Because when I got to the point when I was supposed to start my work on my dissertation, my professor said, so what would you like to write about it? And I said, I don't know. She said, you spent 7 months in Rome. The 7 months in Rome, when we left Poland, we had to renounce our citizenship. So we were nobodies. And we stayed, Italy allowed us to stay 7 months to work on the visa, on the applying for visa. She said, you spent 7 months in Rome, why don't you write about Rome in the poetry of Russian symbolism? And so she told me I usually do what people tell me to do, and I did this. I will return to this in our discussion because so I wrote the dissertation, and there are a few articles about this, and then I wrote on, here are essays on writing and exile. So this is the book. But soon my new, because my poetry, I mean, I published in exile four books, and then after the change of the system in Poland, I published my books in Polish, but my books were translated into several languages. So so this is it.
Thank you. And so I think we've touched a bit about how your books interrogate the past, but I'm curious about the process. So we heard a bit around Matilda and sort of the oral histories and group research you did, Laima. So I'd be curious to hear what your sort of research traditions were, Kierman, and then we can also Katerina too, if we could delve into how you researched your topics for the books. Yeah, let's go down the table. I think we found a process that works.
Okay, so I did research in the New York Public Library about that, about Rosika Schwimmer. She was a Hungarian feminist, pacifist, and Jewish woman. And but while she had an amazing life, and she tried to stop the First World War here, while she was here, and she went to see the President Wilson and try to stop the war, but Wilson wasn't so convinced. So she tried to do the same thing with Henry Ford. So she thought, okay, if I cannot convince the president, I will convince the richest person in the U.S. that at that time was Henry Ford. And they organized like a peace ship to Europe. She had an amazing life, and then she suffered a lot in the Second World War too. But anyway, I went to the New York Public Library, and I was there for 1 year in the archive. It's amazing with the gloves, and you have to use gloves and just a pencil, no pens. It's cold in the place. No, it's amazing. So I was there, but I didn't want to write a biography about her. So I didn't want to conclude the book of her secretary. So I don't know. I'm a writer, and I'm always trying to find new new forms of narrative, new forms of literature, like hybrids. So kind of books that goes from non-fiction to fiction. So it's like here it's like it's a little bit weird in the United States. It's like books are non-fiction or fiction, but in Europe it's like usual, like the mixing of both. So I was taking notes about her life, and then while I was opening the boxes of Rosika Schwimmer's archive, another boxes were opening in my mind. So I was remembering things about the women of my childhood. They were also feminists in the last part of the Franco's dictatorship in Spain and the beginning of the democracy. They were really liberal and feminist women. So I was a kind of, I don't know, child of those so progressive women. So reading about Rosika Schwimmer so was a kind of remembering myself, my childhood in the Basque Country in the 80s and 90s. So then there's the third thing, the third line, plot line in the novel is our life here in New York. So the thing is that I was writing about Rosika Schwimmer, but then I was remembering things of my childhood and youthhood, and then I was writing a diary about our life, our new life, especially the life of my children here in New York. So it's a kind of a novel with three plot lines. But what I want to say is that it's impossible to tell everything. Yeah. It's yeah. So you have to forget things when you're writing a novel about a real character. You have to forget a lot of things, a lot of things. So this is really important because ellipsis, silence, it's really, really important because the reader, if not, cannot go in the book. So those invisible threads, W.G. Siebel told about the invisible threads that are in the books. So those invisible threads are for the readers. So the readers need this silence. They need these ellipses to fill them, to fill with their imagination and with their, I don't know. So it's like, I don't like to tell everything about a real character. It's a kind of, you have to choose what to tell and what not to tell.
And how married did you feel to fact? Like how important was it to accurately represent the details you did decide to share? And what were sort of bridges for your imagination?
Yeah, you have to be really, really like close to, you have to be really honest. I mean, when you are telling the life of a real person, no? You have to be real honest, and you have to tell what happened, because one of the reasons is that you told about that, no? So tell stories that are silenced, that were silenced. So you have to be really honest with that person. But then fiction is necessary too. You need like salt or species are necessary in the food. You need a kind of fiction. So you have to imagine how those people lived. So everything is not told in the papers. You have to imagine. So those parts of fiction are the I love them. So because you feel free to imagine, to do fiction when you don't know things. So you have to construct or build scenes. You have to, yeah, it's a kind of, yeah, a license that you can do.
And then, Katerina, with the goddesses, you did a lot of research, you had said. You were taking oral histories, you went to the Carpathians. I'd be curious if you could enlighten us about that process of discovering their history.
Of course. So it was wonderful years when I made research about the goddesses. When I started to be interested in them, there was not much about them in literature, maybe in old literature from 19th century when the local priest informed about them, like about the women who upset them because they still follow some pagan rituals and pagan traditions, but and some studies by contemporary ethnologists, but really not much. So I started with the journey to the region. I went to the White Carpathians, and 3 years, one after the other, I rent a cottage there, and I made the local research over the summers. I met local people. I visited local archives, and I found really interesting things, like in archive, for example, which was near the village Žítkova, where the story is set, was all the documents from the 20s, from trial, it was Kurd archive. So at 20s was made a trial with the goddesses who conducted the black mass, and because the guy who was the subject of the black mass really died, they were believed to cause this death, and then were called to the court to describe what exactly they did. Finally, they were released because it wasn't proved that this kind of black mass was caused really the death of the man, or if it was a coincidence or what. But in the records from this court was clear how such a black mass seemed, how it was conducted. And such a worthy document served me for creating a story. Another interesting type of documents was the Secret Service files, which the secret police during the communist regime led for the goddesses, because they followed them. For the previous regime, they were a danger because a lot of people believed to their power, a lot of believe were loyal to the goddesses, so they were something like a ideological threat or ideological enemy for them. And the second thing was that they were paid by sometimes money, sometimes by some naturalities, natural things like was eggs or dove or something, by clients who goddesses helped too. So the previous regime, communist regime, see them as alternative medicine, alternative doctors who earned money, which was forbidden, of course, during the last regime by us, because it was uncontrolled money. And they followed them because of that, to prove that they commit crimes. And the records of Secret Service agents was really wonderful. They, for example, was present to some rituals of picking the herbs in spring and summer, where goddesses make it naked. So they followed them to the woods and see naked women how they picking some herbs. And what was even more funny about this situation was how cold language they used to describe the situation, because it was Secret Service agents who were employed from the they weren't educated. They were only loyal members of Communist Party, but their education was of elementary school. So their language was such primitive and cold that it was funny to read about such a situation. So it was great inspiration for my story. And what was even more inspiring was the meeting with the people from the local community in White Carpathians who remembered Goddesses, and they remembered them really very with real emotion, with great emotion. Many of them loved them because they were really helpful for the community. But it was hard to find them. The region of White Carpathian it's mountains, so cottages are in the wood. The village is not a village like the village with the church in the middle and the small houses around the square. It's a kind of a village which consists from cottages or small houses. Does it work? The houses which are hidden in the woods, Thank you. So to find these people who can inform me about the fates and stories of goddesses, it was really hard to find them. But I was really lucky because one of the first people who I met there was a local teacher who was the old woman, and she was interested in my research, and I think that she adopted me somehow because I was a young student. She was teacher, so we made close relationships together. And thanks to her, I was able to visit the families because she took me to the cottages, into the woods, and she was present in my visit when I interviewed the people from these cottages. And because this region is known for its spirit, for the alcohol which is distilled there, it's a kind of strong alcohol. She was always offered, she was usually offered some drinks. They offered it to me as well, and the situation went better and closer and more emotional, and people were talkative more and more. But it was really challenging, this kind of oral history research, because after 2 or 3 or 4 cottages we visited together, she was drunk, I was very tired, and we had really a lot of stories, but we were in the middle of the woods without signal. I had a mobile phone, but signal doesn't work there, and such a wonderful situation I lived through during the research. I missed them. So it was really interesting, challenging, and I collected really a lot of materials which I before even didn't hope in, and it was really a lot what I collected. But then another part of the process started, that I had to find the thread, how to narrate the story, and from these mountains of material, documents, records, audio records, I had to narrate the story, and for me it was.
Oh, I'm so sorry to
I'm
interrupt.
sorry, I'm speaking long.
Oh no, unfortunately we're over time.
Really?
Yes, so we unfortunately have to wrap the panel so the breakout rooms can happen. But Laima, Anna, we'll hear from you, and you can finish your discussions during the discussions in the breakout room. But I'd love it if everyone can give these great authors a round of applause.
Thank you, authors.